All right. Hello, everyone. My name's James. I am the marketing and communications lead at QTouring, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our first tour guides session, our QTouring tour guide session. Before we continue, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of whatever land we are joining on and acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging. It's not very fitting for Q touring, but I'm coming in from Melbourne, which is a Wurundjeri and Burong people's land of the Kulin Nation. I'd like again to extend my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. If you want to put in the chat where you're joining from, you are more than welcome to. And I would love to find out where everyone's coming from on this session. Now, this is the first tour guide session that we're running here at Q Touring. This is a monthly program of online workshops that we have designed to support artists, presenters, and arts workers and help you navigate the Q Touring landscape. Each session, we're going to try and focus on a new topic, a new aspect of touring. That's from planning and partnerships to logistics, funding, regional engagement, all sorts of stuff. And we're also going to try and get some special guests in and industry experts to join in to help us, upskill and discuss everything that's going on in the touring landscape in Queensland. Thank you to everyone who's RSVP'd for this session and the other sessions. Thank you to everyone who's submitted questions so far as well that they want covered on the website. And hopefully this can really help demystify the process of touring and again start some important discussions. For those of you that are joining us at the First Nations, I should also let you know that we are running our first Black Chat series, which is a series that we are running on Thursday nights for the month of February. So we had our first one last week, and we'll have another one tomorrow night. That is a series primarily created for First Nations and Torres Strait Islanders, arts practitioners, and artists. And it's similar to this, but it's a bit more of a forum layout where we can kind of discuss, you know, touring through a bit more of a mob lens. And if you aren't First Nations as well, you are welcome to join us as well. It's really to help discuss how we can create a culturally safe practice and work environment whenever you are working with mob and put a lens on First Nations art. Now, for those of you who are maybe new, this is maybe your first session you've jumped in on with anything that we've done so far, but give a bit of an intro to Q Touring and who we are. Again, for anyone who's jumped on, my name's James. I'm the marketing communications lead here at Q Touring. My background is primarily in music and events. I've worked in marketing at places like Q Music, Channel 7. I've done a lot of events booking for venues across Queensland, and I'm also an artist myself, so I try to have a bit of an understanding of every aspect of what it is to tour, especially in Queensland. We're also joined on the call here by Natalie Lingwoodok. Nat, hi, do you want to unmute yourself and maybe give a bit of an intro? Just everyone can.
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Nat Lingwoodok. I'm a Cubby Cubby, Biri, Bailey, and South Sea Island woman. I live on my father's country in Redcliffe on Cubby Cubby lands. My role at Q Touring is First Nations community engagement and producer. My background is government and just a fan of the arts. I also have started over at Q Music as a First Nations project officer. Um, for 3 days here, 2 days there. Got a full plate. But yeah, I'm excited to um, work with you all somewhere along the traps of Queensland and what touring looks like for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nat. And I should also extend the apologies of the members of Futuring that can't join us this evening. We have our director, Angela Chaplin, who's been with Futuring since day one, and she's very sorry that she can't join us this evening. And also our new, or relatively new, producer and touring and engagement advisor, Jamie. And she's incredible, and she is probably the person you will be in contact with when it comes to some of our initiatives and programs coming up at Q Touring, but we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. And again, just a little bit of an overview about QTouring for those who don't know, but you've managed to make it onto this call at this point, so surely you have a little bit of context, hopefully, by this point. But QTouring is Queensland's state body and arts touring and engagement service. So we are designed to support artists, producers, venues, and communities across Queensland and connect and share arts experiences across the state, particularly in regional and remote areas. We're really excited to be doing this online series because we're based in Brisbane, the Gangan, but it's obviously a little bit tricky to get around our state. So this is our kind of first step to be able to break down some of these borders and get to see your faces and meet you. So we are managed in partnership by Arts Queensland and Stage Queensland, which is Queensland's venue network. What we do, we broker connections between artists and presenters. We're here to provide advice for anyone looking to tour Queensland. We also try to provide capacity building resources, tools, and guides like this, and also the budgeting tool that we'll be talking about this evening. And we really want to just be a central access point for touring projects, community engagement opportunities, and presentation venues. So from that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of introduce this to a budgeting tool. And the way I'll do that is I'm going to jump over to our website. Give me a moment as I share the screen. Here we go, sharing screen, window, QTouring. All right, can everyone see that? Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Yes, awesome. This is our QTouring website. This is the home of everything QTouring. So if you're an artist or a presenter, hopefully you've seen this already. A lot of stuff on this website. A big part of it is our directory. So we have works and presenters. If you are an artist with a tour-ready work, which is mostly what we're going to be talking about tonight, you can upload your work to our directory. This is categorized by a bunch of filters from art form, audience, age group, availability, cost. We'll talk about that tonight. Venue type, whether you're a First Nations work. So on our website, we have over 65 works currently that are tour ready and available for people all over Queensland to find out more on. And then on the other side of that is our presenter directory. So this is a directory of presenters all across Queensland that are programming Queensland work. If you're booking a tour across Queensland, this is designed for you to be able to jump on, see what venues and what presenters are in the area that you're looking at, and see who's programming work, and especially this programming work like yours, ideally. And from there, there's contact information, information about the venue, all sorts of details on there. So if you haven't checked that out before, I really highly recommend you go and dig around in it. We've put a lot of work into it and we're very proud of it, and it's an ever-growing resource that we're working on. But when it comes to work, which is really what we're talking about tonight, to be involved in any initiatives like Q Showcase, which will be coming up again very shortly this year. We'll be able to tell you a little bit more about that in the coming month or so. The way that you apply for Q Showcase is to submit with your work. Now, to do that, you upload a work to the website. You can log in, create your account. We are fully free service as well. You log in, you create your account, you go to your dashboard once you put in all your profile information, and you can upload a work. I've got some incredible works here, as you can see, draft work, which I'm working very hard on, and amazing Queensland work, because it is what it says on the tin. But when you go to create a work, we ask for a bunch of information about your work, from synopsis to the kind of art forms that it's in, what kind of target audience your work is to aim toward, when you're touring it, how long the work goes for, how big your touring party is, venues and capacities, market engagement. There's so much here, but the bit that we're going to talk about tonight is cost. So to upload a work to the QTouring website, we do require you to fill in a QTouring budget. Now, this is that budget here. We're going to go through this budget very shortly and break it down a bit more. This budget is firstly, it's only for us to see for the QTouring team. What we use this budget for is to figure out what cost range your work is in and make sure that A, you're not over costing your work and pricing yourself out of potential touring, but also to make sure that you're not underselling yourself and putting your show up for much too cheap and for something that is not going to be sustainable for touring. That's a big thing that we want to make sure everyone that is touring around Queensland, can sustainably tour. As it says here as well, choose to categorize your work into that category. So if you're looking at a work on the Q Touring site, it'll give a bracket of what cost range it's in. So we're not going to give away your to the dollar fee, because it's up for you to decide how much the work costs, and a lot of that is context as well for where the presenter is. But this tool is also a really important tool for emerging works and especially for emerging artists to help you calculate your fee, your remount fee as well, and the royalties. So here is where you upload your budget. And if you click through there, you'll be able to see the tour budget, and that's the tool there. That's part of the very large resource base that we have here on QTouring. So if you're looking at anything touring based, we have all sorts of stuff on here, information about financial models, seller fees, royalties, a bunch of templates from marketing to presenter, pack kit, petrol calculator. That's my favorite. I'll talk about the petrol calculator at length if you want. If you've got my emails, let me know. But we're going to go into the budget this evening. Now, we have a very special guest to talk through the budget tonight, Nicholas Southey, who was previously actually our producer, touring and engagement broker at QTouring until very recently. Nicholas now works over at Counterpilot as a managing producer, which is very exciting. They actually have a bunch of works on the website. If you want to find out more about Counterpilot, go to the QTouring website. They've got some really cool shows up there. Nicholas was very important in creating both the website and a lot of the stuff that you're going to find on the QTouring website. Nicholas was actually the person who put together this tool. So we figured who better to walk you through the budgeting tool than the person behind it. Nick, do you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself to everyone?
Howdy, everyone. Hi. I've just put myself in the spotlight as well. It's lovely to meet you all and be here with you all. I'm tuning in from Meganjin on Turrbal and Yagara country. And yes, as James said, a lot of history with the organization, and so great to be back to just talk about this tool specifically. Like James mentioned, I now work for Counterpilot, who do interactive and immersive arts experiences. They sort of sit at the intersection of interdisciplinary art and experience design. And alongside that, I also do independent producing and freelance producing. And so budgeting and budget tools, and this budget tool specifically as well. I'm going to quickly just share. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. So as James said, this tool was designed for a very specific purpose. It's a really great budget to start off with. If you're really unsure of how to cost a work, and particularly if you're unsure how to cost in that sort of weekly remount way that we do when we talk about performing arts touring. It's because it's meant to be a starting tool and also meant to mainly just be there to frame costs and help the QTouring team categorize where the show sits. It doesn't have a whole lot of flexibility, like you can't add new rows and that sort of stuff. That's been done like on purpose so that people don't accidentally break it and then get confused. We're all at different points on the journey, and also this tech stuff is not always the easiest to navigate, and so we've tried to make it in a way that means that it's pretty accessible and pretty easy to use. The tool itself has a bunch of little notes and points that you can hover over as well, wherever these red corners are, and they'll sort of give you a bit of an explainer on what those things are if you're a bit confused. And another cool part of the way this tool works is that we take all these costs, or QTouring takes all these costs that you implement in here, and then on the back end there's some wacky calculations, and then it spits out an estimated cost range, or a suggested cost range, which we then take, and that's what we put a basis on for what is going on the website. You can also suggest a preferred one if you think the one that's been put in there is like not accurate, and just leave a note about why. I had to do it recently because it underpriced a work that I was uploading, and I was like, no, it's actually a bit more expensive than that. But that's just the way it is. It's a calculation. It's just trying to work it out and support you on that journey.
I was just going to say as well, I should have mentioned it before, but when you do upload a work, it doesn't automatically go onto the website. QTouring staff like myself and Nat and Jamie, we do actually review the work, and part of that is the budget, and also other elements to make sure that everything is there and you're putting your best foot forward and it's consistent with everything on the website. So it does usually take a little bit of time for us to review that. So we check out this budget and we have a look at it, and then from there we'll either start a conversation about what needs changing, or we'll go ahead and approve it. So yeah, we're all reviewing that kind of stuff.
Thanks, James. Yeah, so when you're looking at this budget and you're trying to work things out, there's instructions here. It's all in the white cells. They're the things you can edit, and you go down, you figure out what it's going to cost to remount the work. So a remount, if you're not familiar with what that is, that's basically the period of re-rehearsal of the work before you go out on the road. That could be very different depending on the work. So if a theatre production, that could be 2 weeks of rehearsal in a theatre venue, basically sort of completely doing the show from scratch. It could be 2 days in a studio if you're a solo dance artist, and it's 2 days in a studio watching an archival and then repracticing the choreography and then going, yep, that's that. And same with a musician, it could be a couple of days of rehearsal, or a couple of hours of rehearsal and then going out on the road. Before I jump into more information on and show you a couple examples of this tool in practice, I did want to frame why we cost shows this way, because it's not necessarily the way everyone would cost a show. And that's part of the reason why there is this tool, is because, and I'm just going to switch over to a different screen. Because everyone costs shows differently, we needed a way of sort of equalizing, well, what's the comparative cost? That's why when you do that upload, you would have seen on James's portal there is you upload the budget, but there is also a spot there where you can define an actual fee. So if you really want to say it's this much for a performance, you can do that. There is that functionality in there. But the reason we cost shows like this, it's a very traditional weekly touring model. The way, and I would encourage you to take a look at this resource, the financial models and sell-off fees resource, when you're trying to figure out anything costings, and includes this touring costings here, because the way that touring costs are figured out, if you're using a sell-off model, and that is the primary thing we're looking to try and do, is try and encourage direct buy-ins or sell-offs, is because it's the most sustainable way for an artist to continue to get a proper fee and a proper wage. There are other ways of doing it. Obviously, there's up here I talk about some of the different financial models. There's self-presentations and box office splits. Those things are definitely options, and they're ways of negotiating with a presenter, maybe for an opportunity, or you think you can actually make more money off the box office. But at a base level, understanding what the seller fee is going to be the most clear way of figuring out what that show actually costs to do, and what it costs to do for yourself as an artist putting a show on, and also what it's going to cost a presenter or someone else to put it on with you. So definitely read through this. We work in a way of weekly costs or running costs, which is basically you figure out what it would cost to do the show or the performance for a full week, and then from there you retroactively try and figure out what's the per performance cost is using percentages. You don't have to do it this way. If you want, you can then go you can go and cost out just what would it cost to do one show on your own. But we work out based off a weekly fee just as a way of standardizing, because that's also the most common way of costing tours as well. So more information can be found in terms of how to cost out per performance costs and what these things are. So definitely take a look at that if you're confused by anything that I'm speaking about in that sense. Now I'm going to jump back into that budget, and we're going to look at a couple examples. There will be time for questions at the end, so don't worry if you're going, what the hell am I saying? Just note it down, and we'll have a chat through. So back in the touring budget tool, if I jump across, like I said, it's all protected, so you can only fill in and edit certain cells. But in the unprotected version, you can sort of see a little bit of the calculations that we're doing here. So it's basically reading a whole bunch of numbers and trying to figure out what your show costs based on how long it takes to bump in, how long it takes to bump out, how many estimated presenters there are in a tour. And that looks something like this. So if I was a large theatre company, and apologies, I am going to talk theatre because that's mostly my background, but I can speak to other examples, but it's just not naturally where my brain goes. But if you're doing a theatre work, you think it's going to be on the road for several weeks. There's going to be 10 presenters who are going to take on the tour. You've been having chats with different presenters, and 10 of them have said, yeah, we're keen, we're really keen. Or maybe 15 have said we're keen, but actually really you're probably only going to land 10 in the end. You can start to figure out what these costings are. There's a note here. If you're really unsure of what to use, I would just use 5 as a standard. If you can get 5 presenters on a tour, that's like a pretty good, very solid tour, and should be viable. But of course that's different with each show. In here, we explain how long it takes us to bump in. So there's more information on the QTouring website about these different definitions, but basically a same day open, you bump in and you perform that night. A second day open, you need a full day and then probably another part day before you perform on the second night. Third day open is the same thing, and fourth day and so on. And a bump out, in this model, most shows should bump out immediately after the final show or the next day, and so that's how this is worked out. This is also worked out on the assumption that you're going to travel the day before you'll arrive. So if it's the same day open, you would travel up the night before, and then you would bump in the morning day, perform that night, and then head home. So that's basically how it's trying to work things out and trying to estimate what's going on. So if I was costing this out, it's quite a large show. It's a main stage show. It's going to take 3 days for it to be fully bumped into the venue, and it's going to need a whole day, or at least a half day, to bump it out at the end of it. I've popped in here. I've selected from the drop down those 2 options, which will help us later on when we get to calculating our cost range. In the salaries and fees, we basically just worked out who's involved in the show. Well, it's a show, there's 6 actors in the show. There's a director, there's going to be a stage manager, and we're also going to bring a tour manager on tour who's going to help sort of support the team in a tour managery way, and maybe help a little bit in terms of crew, but mainly is looking at all the things around the tour. And we're also going to need to pay a lighting designer to come back and redesign the lighting design for all the venues on the tour. These figures that I popped in here are around about or slightly above the MIA and Live Performance Award rates. So getting into rates, we'll talk more about how you decide rates in a second. But that's where these things are sitting. So you'd be paying your performers $1,465 a week. Your director would get $1,600 a week. Your designer would get $1,450 a week. Same with your stage manager, would get slightly less, $1,350, because they're just there to do the stage management of the show. And your tour manager is going to be a bit more sort of like an on-the-ground producer, production manager role. So probably needs to get paid a little bit more, has a bit more responsibility. And it's going to take 2 weeks of rehearsal in here to get the show up. So that's the remount. So this is how we calculate the remount cost in terms of wages. There's 6 performers in the show. We're going to need to bring the director back. We're going to need to bring the lighting designer back. We're going to need to bring a stage manager in, and the tour manager is also going to need to come in. In this budget, just to make it a little bit tricksy and just show you a really detailed example of it, I've said that we're going to need to pay the director and the tour manager an extra 2 days of wages in prep time before they even get into the rehearsal room. So that's why that is 2.4. So that's sort of how that's been calculated. But then on tour, we don't need the director and we don't need the designer. We just need the 6 actors going out on tour and the stage manager and the tour manager going out on tour. So we just put PAX, which is it means something. I can't remember what it actually means, but it basically means like the number of people. So if you're saying 6 packs, there's 6 people. And the fees stay the same. Based on what you select over here in the fee type will depend on whether super and work cover are calculated for them. So if they're contracted with super, which is what most of these engagements are usually, someone's got an ABN, they're an independent contractor, you're engaged them as an independent contractor. But there's rules around super, so we'll talk about that as well in a moment. But so most people are generally a contractor with a super obligation, or they might just be a contractor. There's no super obligation, or you're paying them an honorarium instead of a fee, a full fee. Those sorts of honorariums really should only be for situations where it's someone who's not really actually responsible for anything. They're coming on the tour, or they're coming as part of a presentation to learn or to support. But it's an honorarium by definition is a reimbursement for or a fee or a contribution in acknowledgement of volunteer work done. So most people are employees or they're contractors. And you should be engaging them in that way, ideally. But also, it's the arts and it's touring, so we're realistic about that. In the remount, we're going to need to hire a rehearsal space, and it's going to need to be a big rehearsal space because it's going to we need to basically hire out a theatre for 2 weeks or a very large rehearsal space for this show. So it's going to cost $1,000 a week. I've pulled that number from thin air, but roughly what that's going to be for 2 weeks. There's going to be a specific light in this show, a very specific light that most of the venues won't have, and we're going to need it for the rehearsal as well. So we actually need to hire that ourselves. All the other equipment and production costs are going to be supplied by the venue, and we're going to adapt to the venue. But this one light we cannot live without. It does a very cool thing in one scene, and so we must hire it. So we're hiring it for the whole remount, and then it's coming on tour with us. Same with set maintenance. It's been a couple of years since the last time we did the show, so we're going to pull it out of storage, and we're going to have a bit of a budget line there because we expect. We remember when James was packing the set away in storage that he chipped one of the sides off, and so it's probably going to need to be replaced and repainted. So,
and I'm really sorry about that as well.
Yeah, I was pretty miffed, but it's okay. So we have a bit of a budget line in there for that. And same with costumes. We might not be able to get one of the actors, so we need to refit the costumes to a new actor. So there's a bit of money in there for that, as well as consumables, which are your just general random costs you're going to need. In this example, there's batteries, there's tape, and there's this one scene in the show where we need a real cake. So we're going to need to buy a real cake every single time we do the show because they throw it across the wall and it splatters everywhere. So those are the sort of like consumable random costs to think about when you're paying for a show. It could be flutter or confetti, or it could be fresh flowers, or it could be little cardboard cutouts that get destroyed or something like that. It could be any number of things, but they're going to be a cost that you're going to have to incur every single time you do the show, and every single time you do like a full rehearsal of the show as well. We've got a little bit of money in here for marketing materials. We're just going to design some new assets just to send out to the presenters, just so that they have some updated material that fits with the brand. It's not a huge amount of money there. It's just a little bit in there just to pay a graphic designer a little bit to do a couple things. Most of the marketing material already exists. In the travel costs here, we've got an actor flying up from Sydney for the remount. So we don't include these costs in our weekly running costs because they are considered travel costs or touring costs. If you want to know more about touring costs, check out that resource I showed you about financial models and calculating your seller fee. It talks all about what the difference is between a weekly cost and a touring cost. So your travel costs are generally considered touring costs, not weekly costs. But in a remount, you will need to pay if someone needs to travel. That's the exception to the rule, is if someone needs to fly somewhere, or during the remount you need to go do recordings on site somewhere, you're going to need to pay for those costs. But then on tour, they should be included in your touring costs. And like I said, read that really great resource. And if you have any questions about what the difference is between a running cost or a week cost and a touring cost, contact the QTouring team. We've got a little bit of money in here for an administration fee. Those are things like if you need to pay for a SIM card for the team, or you need to hire a MacBook, or you need to do some printing, whatever it is. It's a bit of money in there that supports the admin of the show. And we've just thrown a token producer fee in there. The producer's only helping to broker the tour and contract it, and then they're no longer involved. So it's a small fee here, and some supporting fees as well to do remote producing while they're on the road. There's a small contribution towards your public liability insurance in here. Again, this number plucked from thin air, but it's because it will depend on what your public liability insurance is. But there is a genuine case for including it in your budgets, because it's an overhead that you need to have for touring. And so to make sure your audiences are safe and that your venues are protected from liability, it's a requirement quite often. And so it is fair to figure out what the prorated amount of that would be while you're on tour. So if you take your total premium for your public liability and then figure out what it would cost if you divide it by 52, so for every week, then you'd probably get a rough number for what this should be. For every week you're on tour, this amount is a contribution. For travel insurance, now this is one that most people miss, is that you'll need to take out travel insurance. I would suggest you take out travel insurance for your tour, for your touring party, so that when they're on tour, and also that should actually be over here. That's wrong, sorry, but it's a remount cost, because you're not going to pay for it every week. You're just going to usually just pay for it once at the start for the entire travel period. Again, this number you would need to check and confirm. This is an estimate based on other travel insurance quotes I've gotten. Basically, your travel insurance costs you if it gets cancelled, or like someone gets injured while they're away, or your luggage gets stolen, all that sort of stuff. Having that stuff there is a really important barrier to protect against financial loss. And in other here, I've just put a bit of contingency money. I'm going to mark it as contingency as well. All right, that's how you cost a show. I know that's a lot of stuff to do, but it's pretty straightforward in terms of just working down the list. If you start in this column here in your remount, what do you need to do to spend to put the show back on? And then working down your on tour costs. What is it going to cost every single week you're on tour, just for 1 week? And then you get spit out a lovely estimated per performance cost. So what this has essentially done is tried to figure out from your weekly costs and your remount, the amount of presenters that are there, the amount of bump in days, the amount of time it's going to take to bump out, how much it is going to cost for them to do one show or 1 day of shows. That's where that figure comes from, which is huge, way above the weekly cost, and that's because the remount is just ginormous. So the lovely reality of touring. But that is that's basically how it works it out, and then it suggests a actual cost range from there. So in terms of QTouring's, the way they cost things, that falls into the 10,000 and over estimated cost range for a performance. So this is for QTouring. This section here is for QTouring stuff. It's a good reference point, but you could decide to cost your show differently. These costs, this budget is still incredibly useful to figure out what it's going to cost you. But this number here, you don't need to take this as your Bible of like going like, oh, well, this is exactly what it's going to cost, and this is exactly what I need to tell presenters it's going to cost. It's an estimate, it's a guide. There's so many factors that contribute to that, and so take it with a grain of salt, and make sure you've got your. I would suggest taking, when you're actually going to do your per performance costings, taking these numbers and then using the financial models and sales fee guides, the resource that I showed before, and applying that logic to it rather than using this here. This is very specifically just a QTouring cost range. Okay, that was a big show, little show, tiny little show. And by tiny, it's relatively small. 3 people need to go on tour. You can do 6 shows a week. They can bump in that same day, and they can bump out that same night. And you think you're going to get about 5 for the tour, 5 presenters engaged for the tour. So for your remount, same logic applies. Your 2 performers that are going on tour need to rehearse. Your director needs to come back in to rehearse. You're going to need to bring in a lighting designer. And I'm saying lighting designer in this situation, but it could depend. It could be if it's if the set needs to be remade for touring, you might need to bring in a set designer. Or if the vision design, the projection design needs to change, you need to bring in someone to redesign that for the venues. And same with the stage manager. There's no tour manager going out on this one. It's just it's a small team, and the stage manager is sort of half acting as the tour manager as well. It's a bit of shared responsibilities. It's a bit of a laid back independent. We love it. And these fees are in line with more in line with the live performance award rate. So they're much lower than what you saw in the other one, but should still be above award. It's a smaller show. It's a much simpler show. Maybe it's and by simpler, I mean beautifully artistically complex, but production wise smaller. And it's a clowning show or a circus show. And so you only need a week, because it's not like you need to really heavily script every moment. There's a bit more freedom in there, and so a week will get you by. That's how that's been costed. And then same thing on tour, your 2 performers and your stage manager. The director isn't going out on tour, and neither is the designer. For the rehearsal, we just need we basically just need any space. So for a week, we just need to get an empty room. So it could be a classroom, it could be anything. So it's a much cheaper rehearsal space. There's no specific equipment we need for this in terms of this one light or this one thing that we can't live without. Everything else we can make work with what the presenter might have. There's still probably going to be a bit of a set maintenance cost and a costume maintenance cost, and consumable costs as well, because there's lots of cream pies being like thrown in people's faces. I'm sorry, I'm debasing clowning, and I'm really sorry. But there's still lots of consumables in this show. No one's flying up from Sydney for this one, because who can afford that? So no travel costs for this. And the marketing materials, you got pretty much all of them done during your initial season. You're not going to be paying anyone to design new ones for this season. Admin fee as well, smaller producing fee. a contribution to public liability, and then also your contingency costs. And again, down the bottom here, it's spat out a number, a much smaller number, that has taken all the information we've provided it and figured out what would it cost to put on this show for one day or one performance. So it's sitting at $2,500 to $5,000 range, which is pretty good. That is the QTouring budget tool and how it works. Before we open up to questions, I'm just going to quickly show some resources to help you figure out where some of those costs and how to figure out what figures you should use for those costs. I think one thing also to remember when you're doing this budget in particular, and also doing any budget, we call them spec budgets or spectacle budgets. You don't know until you know the exact set of circumstances what the costs are going to be. So when you're trying to budget out what the tour is going to cost, you're not going to know exactly what the price of a cake is going to be at that time period, and how much it's going to cost you to get 10 cakes. You can get an idea, but it's going to be spectacle. And so understanding that those costs are in flux at this early costing stage. So jumping back into this wonderful page here, and I'm just going to move the annoying Teams you're sharing a screen thing out of the way so I can change tabs. So like I said, this resource, really great. Definitely read it. There's also a relatively new and wonderful website and organization called Creative Workplaces. Creative Workplaces is a sub-department of Creative Australia, or the old Australia Council for the Arts. That's the federal funding body for the arts. They have established Creative Workplaces, and it's only been in the last, I think it's been like less than a year. It's been, I don't know, 6 months, honestly, that this website's been open and available. It is growing. We understand what it's like building a website and launching a website. There's lots of things that need to be added, but it's also a really great resource. And also it's government advice. And there's a part of me that goes, hey, the government said that. Come on. Someone's got to have signed off on that. The arts minister had to sign off on that. So surely the tax information is correct. But there's a lot of really great resources on this website. There's a whole section on contracts and payments and what the difference is between an artist, an independent contractor, and an employee is. It's got all this stuff to help you figure that out. It also has a bunch of information about whether you need to pay an independent contractor super. Really great stuff here. And then there is also a section on rate guides as well, to help if you're in the dance world, if you're in touring visual arts, if you're working with writers or screen. There's a bunch of information in here about that, and it goes further than that. Like there's information on how to invoice, how to do contracts. There's some really great First Nations stuff in here as well about ICAP and making your a culturally safe workspace. And those might have implications on your touring costs as well. If you're working with First Nations artists, you might, or you're working with that content, you might very well, you should be working with someone, a cultural consultant, or engaging in the community in that way, and you should be paying someone to do that. So, understanding these things, looking at these sort of resources can be really, really great to understand how we arrive at costs and what costs might be implicated in making a budget. There's also a whole ATO page about super for contractors, and a bunch of information as well about what is ordinary time earnings, which applies to super. Don't worry about this though. Look at that, and look at the super for independent contractors, and look at the Creative Workplaces stuff, because that's the most relevant. In terms of the hardest, the thing you've got to get right with a budget, and often the biggest cost in a budget, will be the cost of paying your artists. And that could be yourself, or that could be other artists that you bring on board to tour with you. The Live Performance Award, if you're working in live performance, is the basis for costs. We in this sector work in a interesting way. We're often engaged as independent contractors. which means that the Live Performance Award technically doesn't apply to contractors. It only applies to employees. But using this as a standard means that when you're working with independent contractors, at least you know that you're pricing things or pricing their wages or whatever it's going to be, or costing out the allowances for them at a level that would be commiserate with what an employee would get, which is, according to Fair Work, meant to be a livable wage. So working off this as your basis is a really great way to start. There's a whole page here. It's a very dense document, but the big things I'd point out, it's got your information about minimum rates here. And then down the bottom, way down the bottom, way down the bottom, in Schedule A, there's classification definitions. And this is basically a way you can go down and figure out, okay, of the levels in that minimum rates, which one does this belong to? So if I scroll down to level 8, production and support staff, or production and support staff level 8, it's got stage manager right here. It says indicative positions, and this is indicative. This isn't a entire list of, hey there, this isn't a final list of positions. It could be more, and that's why they've sort of got these tasks up the top here, these indicative tasks, but the positions here are key. So if I read this, I know I should be paying my stage manager at this level, at a minimum, is this level 8 level. And same with your artists, your performance artists. They've got your company dancer, third-year dancer. It's got all this information to help you categorize things. A performer category 2 or a performer category 1, grade 2, and it's got the information on what those are, but that's a live performance employee level 9. So that's how you can sort of figure out, okay, if I jump back to the minimum rates. If I'm paying a stage manager, I need to pay them production and support staff level 8, which is where I got that $1,250 for, that I put in the small budget that I did for the small show. And I rounded up the performer fee as well from 1,224 to 1,250 as well. So this is where you can find a lot of the basis for costs. Then there are the pay rate guides, which are linked to on that Creative Workplaces website. But this is the Australian Production Designers Guild information about how long you should be engaging a designer and how much you should be paying them. It's in here. It's their rates guide. That's the Australian Production Designers Guild. And that can be used as a guide. If you've got a bigger budget or it's a bigger show or you've got funding, you might be wanting to pay your designers at the Production Designer Guild rate rather than the award rate, because it's a better rate and a more appropriate rate. And same with your MIA, which is the PCA minimum rates here, our Performers Collective Agreement minimum rates. That is where you can figure out weekly rates according to the union, what the union has negotiated with the major venues and major presenters, what should a performer be getting paid. See, it's slightly higher rate. It's about, and by slightly higher, it's about $110 more a week than what the grade 2 level is in the Live Performance Award. So understanding these things is a great way to know what your capacity is, know what your minimum is, and know what is sort of industry standard as well. You'll notice that there are some rates that aren't covered anywhere. They're things like directors and producers. So it's sort of you can sort of cost them however you want in those bands. A good rule of thumb is that they should be getting paid at least the same as what everyone else is getting paid. If you're paying a designer at the Production Guild rates and then you pay your director at like $1,000 a week, it's like, maybe that's not the best way to do it. But if you're engaging your designer on that level, maybe your director should be at that level as well, or should be at the same level as everyone else, so everyone's getting paid the same rate. and your producer as well. That's often a conversation with your producer. If you don't have a producer and you're self-producing, make sure you include that in your budget. You should still have a sort of a producing administration budget line in there for yourself. That is a totally valid cost. If you're going to go on tour as a performer or you're going to be at least involved in the remount as director, you should be getting paid a fee for that time as in the remount as director or on tour as the performer, as well as a contribution for the producing time that it has taken you. That is a totally valid and fair cost. How do you calculate admin and produce costs? And I said, that is a great question. And it's perfect because I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to throw over 2 questions. James, I think, is going to ask me the questions. I do know that there was a couple that were pre-submitted. So, Anessa, we might get to yours in a moment after we've gotten through those pre-submitted ones.
Yeah, totally. And also, I should stress as well, all of those resources and those different websites that Nicholas just touched on and went to, if you go to the tour guides page on the QTouring website, I have uploaded a tour guide session 1 budgeting resource kind of fact sheet, which kind of has all of those different links and everything that we've covered tonight for the most part. And again, any questions that we don't get to today or anything that is maybe comes up when you're working on your own budget, just reach out to QTouring at hello@qtouring.com.au. We will be here to answer all those questions and help you through this process. I'm going to jump into the pre-submitted questions and then we'll jump into the ones in the chat, and hopefully that kind of covers everything as well. Firstly, just go to the QTouring website, the QTouring page on the QTouring tour guides page on the QTouring website, where you would have found the RSVP link for here. Firstly, how to ensure cost effectiveness when budgeting for touring. Any tips, tricks for ensuring value for money, particularly when in regards to being successful with grant applications?
So I'll speak specifically to the grant applications side of that question. The best way to be successful with a grant is to, and this is purely anecdotal because it really depends on the day and the time and what other works are in that grant application round. You could have the best application in the world and still not get through because they've got the course success rate is like 8%. So, and the Touring Queensland Fund is better. It's about 50%. So that's good. But, there's a lot of competitiveness there. So, but the best thing you can do is to be very clear on what the cost is. So try and break down your costs as much as possible. And by that, I mean the level of detail that we have in that touring budget tool. You don't need to go like into every single cost. But if there are key costs, like if I was putting it in a grant application, that equipment hire a line, I would specify that it's specific, like it's lighting hire for X light, and then in the budget notes, make a note of this specific cost is for that, because otherwise equipment hire could be anything. So trying to be a bit more specific in those specific categories, but broadly speaking, the thing you want to be is going like this: we're paying performers X amount of weeks on tour plus X amount of remount time at X rate, and that comes to this amount, and trying to be as detailed as you can so that an assessor goes, I understand where all this money is going, I understand what it's being spent on, and I feel comfortable handing this money over. I'm not going to feel comfortable handing it over just if I've put in my expenses, cost of first show. Not that I think anyone would do that necessarily, but combining your costs too much, they'll go, I don't actually know what the money's getting spent on. I'm just giving them $10,000 to spend on the show, I guess. And that's the big thing with grants, and that's all grants, and also with touring grants as well.
I'm just going to really quickly jump in. If in the off chance that this call ends in 20 seconds, because we've hit the hour minute, everyone just jump back into the call and we'll continue from there. I'm just really hoping that we don't have like a Mission Impossible style. This meeting will explode in T minus 10 seconds. But if that happens, just jump back onto the call. I've extended it to 7:30, and then we'll go from there.
If that does happen, James, do you want to maybe write down the questions that are in the chat so we don't lose them? And then, so cost effectiveness when budgeting for touring. I can't give you any specific tips on that. I think the biggest thing I can do is the biggest costs that will hit you are in your wages, and so understanding that your wages are fair, and that doesn't mean underselling yourself, but it also means being realistic about what that is. I also think you'll figure out very quickly whether your costs are reasonable, because if no one wants to buy the show, it's probably too expensive. So trying to figure that out is the biggest thing. Moving into a space, thanks, Jude. Moving out of this weekly costing space and into a box office split model, or something where you might have a small contribution and then you're taking the rest from something else, merchandise that isn't a direct sell-off. You've got to understand what your hard costs are, like what you need to spend money on to do the show, and then you're trying to reduce everything else around that. And then artist wages are the last thing of the non-hard costs that you start to look at. Would be my suggestion, is what do I need to spend? I know I need to spend $500 to get this specific costume piece remade, or I don't know if that's the best example, but understanding what those hard costs are, and then minimizing other costs where you can, and then if you've minimized as much as possible, looking at how are the wages looking, and is there a different way of working things? But that's the best advice I can give you in terms of effectiveness. And as much as possible, we don't want to be cutting our artist wages.
Yeah, definitely. Another question we have, for small to mid-scale regional tours, what budgeting model tends to be more sustainable? Flat presenter fees, box office splits, or hybrids? Now, I do think we have a bit of information about that in one of the resources that we have on the QTouring site. But do you have any kind of insight on that, Nick?
I would just add to that, in terms of sustainable, the thing that is going to get you the most consistent wage and is going to mean you're not losing money the most consistently is a flat presenter fee, getting paid a direct sell-off or a buy-in fee. But other models are totally valid and definitely things you need to consider. And so you'll probably get more performance opportunities if you go a box office split or a hybrid model. That's definitely you're more likely to get presenting more shows, more presenting opportunities. But that's a choice to make as a producer, and also for your artists as well.
Totally. Another question we have: when touring with multiple performers or small ensembles, what are the key cost areas that people most often underestimate? What areas are you seeing that people are cutting themselves short in budgets?
Besides their wages, because everyone undercuts their wages, is the biggest cost area that I think people underestimate. James, did you mean to spotlight yourself? Because it's huge on my screen.
Oh my god, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, okay. Everyone.
You were just giant on my screen. I was like, James, you're going to interrupt me. What are you going to tell me? I got it all wrong. The biggest cost area that people underestimate is actually the touring costs, which we didn't look at, because in answer to Jacob's question that I think I saw in the chat before, the assumption is that your touring costs, so your travel costs, your accommodation, your flights, are not included in your fee. That's the standard, is you work them out separately, because it's going to cost you the same no matter where you go to put the show in XYZ venue. But if I'm flying to the Northern Territory to do a show versus me doing it just down the road in Ipswich, the cost of travel and stuff is hugely different. So it's sort of hard to include those in this early costing stage of a budget. But that is also the area where people underestimate their costs the most, in terms of when you're talking about touring 8 people, like in that example that I showed with the big show, or 8 performers plus stage manager and a tour manager, so 10 people on the road or whatever it was, something crazy. You then also have to pay on top of that, or the presenter has to pay, or your funding has to pay on top of that, the cost of their meal allowance, their accommodation, their flights, all of those things. And that will often far outweigh the cost of actually putting on the show. And so understanding that is a good thing to know when you're having conversations with presenters, and also when you're having conversations about how to cost your show and how to budget your show. Is the cost of touring a 1-person show or a 2-person show or a 3-person show. It's not just the fact that it's a smaller group of people, so there's less people to pay. There's also way less accommodation costs, way less flights, way less ground transport. It is a huge thing that is, I often will run when I'm costing with presenters. I'll be quoting them a fee, but then I'll be sort of having a side budget that's just for me, where I'll sort of be roughly estimating what it would cost to get to that location as well, so I can have those things in mind. Because if I know it's going to cost 3 times as much because I'm trying to get straight from Brisbane all the way to Townsville from nowhere, like that's a huge cost, and it means that I probably won't get Townsville or Cairns programmed until I get a few more stops along the way. So you can start to tell that story to a presenter about how you're reducing some of those costs as well, or that you're going to get funding to support those things, or that don't worry, we're all going to drive up in my van, so there's no car hire, we just need fuel contribution, which happens. So understanding those things.
Definitely. Another one here. How do you recommend structuring a tour budget to manage risk if ticket sales are unpredictable in regional areas? And then I guess on top of it as well, are there any benchmarks that are worth looking at to decide whether it's financially viable before confirming shows in regional areas?
So I would first take a step back and go financially viable versus just viable. They are 2 separate things. A financially viable option is something that means you're not going to lose money. And that is, and I mean, ideally, it also means that you are getting then paid a proper wage to do that performance, or a proper fee to do that show. So financial viability is a much harder thing to bridge than just the general viability of something, like whether I think this investment is worth it, worth making it work, even though I know that it's probably not financially viable. And there's so many things that come into that like it's a lot of context factors come into that but you know, for an example, and this is a very different situation, but in the organization I currently work for, Counterpilot, we're talking about trying to do some very, very cheap, basically bare bones cost shows, because we think that it's going to build a relationship with a presenter that hopefully means then that we can then pitch a bigger show to them next time, and try and build that trust in that relationship and develop that relationship. We're obviously in a very different position to an independent artist or an independent producer, because we are able to look across our year and try and balance those things out. But, you know, understanding those things, you might have a really successful show that makes you a bunch of money, and, you know, you're going to start putting a portion of it aside to support a loss-making tour. Yeah, that's what a lot of people do with their Edinburgh Fringe seasons. They build money up touring in locally or doing gigs locally, and then they put that money aside to do an Edinburgh Fringe season. Recommending for structure. Sorry, and I know I'm talking.
Oh, no, that's okay.
There's so much to say. Structuring a tour budget to manage that risk. the best things I can say is it goes back to that understanding what are your hard costs, what are your soft costs, and what are your what are those flexible costs? Because if you know that ticket sales might be unpredictable, you need to at least cover the cost of the actual things you're going to have to take money out of your pocket and spend on. So if your ticket sales will not cover those costs, or if you only get, if you're budgeting based on getting 80% of your ticket sales in a regional area that you've never been to before, that's a huge risk. And I would be going, well, what's a more reasonable amount? For my first time, it's probably 30%, or if I'm really ambitious and I've got a really supportive local group, it could be 50%. And then once you have a bit of an idea of what your sales have been like, and you can start benchmarking. But at an early stage, the biggest thing to manage risk is underestimate how many sales you're going to get as much as possible and go and start from there.
Beautiful. I've got a question here, which was how do you know how to adjust to every given venue? I think, as Nick's probably mentioned already, using this budget and then looking at touring and accommodation and the travel on top of that is a really good way to do it. And then also, as Nick mentioned, considering maybe rescaling your show based on the location, and kind of maybe if it is a smaller venue that is far away, or depending on what the kind of variables are there, looking at what's going to make sense for you. A good question we had here, which I think might be worth us touching on, Nick, is when is it a good time to talk about money, or when is it awkward or low-key rude?
My response to that as a producer is immediately talk about money immediately. But if I'm giving you real advice, I think talking about it sooner rather than later is a good thing. But you'll know if a presenter is taking you seriously and if a presenter is really interested, because they will ask. They'll ask the question of how much would this cost, or do you have a cost range? If a presenter isn't really engaging in that conversation, I would be going, they don't seem to want to know about the show or what it's going to cost them to do it. Are they really interested? Is this really worth me arguing with them to try and get it there? I'm not saying you should give up on it, but like those are things I'd be considering. So ideally as soon as possible, and it doesn't have to be I think you can frame it in different ways. Once you've done that initial reach out, if they've said, oh yeah, no, send through some information, you could do it at that stage. If you're wanting to be very clear about what it's going to cost, you could send them through the tech specs or the presenter pack and go. And also, just as a heads up, it's the cost is sitting around this range. You could do it at that point. And
when it comes to that, Nick,
yes,
I was just going to say, we've got another question which I think ties into what you're about to say, but throwing around loose figures early, where does that kind of sit? Obviously, using a budget to inform those figures is the best way to start, but in that kind of conversation, where do those early figures kind of come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think with early figures, that's another thing. Sorry, just talking about money. If you don't know, don't say anything. If you don't know what it's going to cost, don't lie, because you don't want to get yourself in a situation where you're like, oh, it's going to cost me, $1,000 to get up there or something like that, and then it actually is going to cost you $5,000, and you're like, oh shit, how am I going to find $4,000? It happens. So budgeting early, budgeting with room, a little bit of room, so you can, if those costs change, you have that in there. And the big thing is, though, until you have confirmed a tour or confirmed a stop, you don't need to go and say it's going to cost you $2,540. You can say, and that's partially why we do the cost range on the QTouring website. You could say, hey, currently it's sitting in this range. It's sitting in it's going to cost somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000. And once I know the exact cost based on the other stops how I'm going to get there, I can let you know. That is a totally valid thing to do. It's also totally valid to say, we're not quite at that stage yet. Not sure what the costs are. People, if they're interested, they do want to understand where the money is sitting. So you can be loose, but ranges are the best way, rather than like tying yourself to a figure. And because you also don't want to say, I'm being safe, and so I'm going to say it's going to cost $5,000 based on a budget I did where there was a lot of contingency in there, but I actually think I can trim it back to $3,000 or something like that per show. So being able to suggest a range and just let them know that it's not final is a totally valid approach.
Cool. I've got a few questions here that are probably a little bit more relevant to other aspects, and I'm just being conscious of time here, that are more about actual shows, where to start, that kind of thing. For those kind of questions, definitely shoot them through the hello at QTouring, and we can help you out. That's what we're here to do, is to provide advice. So I'm just going to try and just touch on the last one or two questions when it comes to like the budget, just so we're really kind of on focus here. The question here is, how do you calculate admin and producer costs? Obviously, we have kind of discussed the rate that you've mentioned before, but for those, I guess, roles that aren't necessarily outlined in those rates that were provided before, do you have any advice for that kind of thing?
Yeah, a good rule of thumb, if you're is including a producer and administration fee, usually that sits around up to 10% of the cost of the show. So if it's going to cost you $5,000 to put it on for a week or for a show, there'd be also $500 that you would set aside or add on to your fee. That's your producer and admin costs. It depends on what the conversation is with the producer or with those things, but I, as an independent producer, if I'm not getting engaged on a fee, I usually work on a commission basis for these types of things, which is I'll work with you to pitch the show out, and whatever the show's going to cost, it's a 10% commission, or depends on the size of the show. But that's a good way of just sort of starting to understand what those costs might be. But also some producers might be like, for every show we get, I want $5,000 or $1,000, and that really just depends on what the producer wants and how badly you need a producer. But most of the independent producers I know, or producers that work with independent artists, usually work on a commission basis.
Amazing. I think, based on all the other questions that we had pre-submitted, that kind of really relevant to budgeting. I think we've kind of covered that. And again, if you have a question that is separate, shoot it through. Does anyone in the chat have any questions, remaining questions about budgeting? Nick, just while we have him. Doesn't look like it. I can't see anyone typing in
Jacob
the chat.
does.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Jacob,
Hello,
yeah,
can I
jump in,
talk? Is
Jacob.
that okay?
Of course, of course.
The last time I went to the beautiful QTouring conference, I had some feedback from some presenters that my fee was too low and that they wouldn't take it. Acknowledging that I hadn't included travel or accommodation in that fee, I was just like, here's the show, buy it, and then we'll talk about it. Do you have any like inside goss as to how to navigate that kind of conversation around what is something worth, and how frugal can we be?
Well, it is a thing that happens, that you're not charging enough, and so we won't take it, because these presenters, or particularly council-run venues and major presenters, they have an obligation to be paying their artists properly, and so they can't be seen to be underpaying artists. So I would refer back to those rate guides and for how to figure that out. I know that's like not really helpful because it does depend, but I would be using those as your benchmark. And I would be going like, if I'd be starting at the base level of that live performance award, and then if you're getting lots of interest, you could bump it up, or you could do the other way. You could start at a higher rate what you think you deserve, which is totally a valid thing, because often we don't get paid what we think we deserve. But we, what you think you deserve or what you think it's worth, and then if you're not getting anything, understanding, okay, well, maybe we need to peel that back down to what the base level is on the award.
Amazing. We've got a question here just from Inessa. What is admin cost? Are you able to summarize that? Maybe.
So admin costs in that budget, the QTouring budget, is specifically costs that you will incur in touring the show or in remounting the show that aren't production specific costs. So that is those things like printing. If I need to go and print a bunch of scripts, or if I need to buy a SIM card or pay for someone to have a mobile phone while they're out on tour so that they can be contacted or something like that. Those are what those costs are for. It's usually good to just have a little bit of money in that budget line, just so that you're not having to pull out of I need to buy a internet dongle, and so now I need to pull that out of the consumables line, but I actually need that to pay for the cake that I'm using in every show.
So subscriptions, monthly subscription, for example, for mailing or website or that sort of course, do you include into that admin costs or not?
You definitely, yes, you definitely can. You can figure out, you can try, and you can't, unless it's specifically for the show and specifically for that tour, I wouldn't be going and saying, well, you need to pay for my Adobe that I pay for because I'm going to use some Photoshop to do some graphics on this show. But you could definitely add up, well, what does it cost me to do my shows across a whole year in terms of having all that software, and then try and figure out some sort of prorated amount as a contribution towards those. So that is definitely a totally valid admin cost, unless it is specifically for said show and only for said show, or is being primarily used for said show or said tour. You can't really include it just in your budget as like a full figure, but you definitely can try and figure out a reasonable contribution. That's what we do with the insurances as well.
Yeah, okay. Definitely good to separate the work and the organization costs, I think, is a really good factor to not also blow out your budget on the work. And also, we've got a comment here from Roger who said, yeah, he's applied for a bunch of grant and wasn't successful on the basis that he hadn't factored in enough costs for myself. I've definitely had that situation as well. I'm sure a lot of us as independent artists have probably faced that, hopefully, at some point, telling us that we should be paying ourselves a little bit more. With that, I might cut off the questions. And again, any other questions, please shoot them through to hello@qtouring.com.au, and we will answer them. And if we don't have the answer, we'll find the answer for you. That's exactly what we're here to do. I'd like to thank Nick again so much for coming in and presenting this. Yeah, such a budgeting wizard. It's great to have, get the information straight from the source when it comes to this tool. So really appreciate your time, Nicholas, and go check out the work that they're doing over at Counterpilot. There's some really exciting shows coming up, and hopefully touring around Queensland very soon. Now, as for tour guides, this is a monthly program, as I mentioned earlier. We will have another session next month. That is on March 4th. Same kind of situation on a Wednesday night, I believe. Yes, on a Wednesday night. That will be about Q Showcase applications. I don't want to give too much away, but if everything goes right in the world, we should be very much on track to talk about uploading your works and applying for Q Showcase. This budget is obviously part of uploading your work to the website, so we figure this is the best one to kind of kick off with, as it's the one that seems to be the most time intensive part of uploading your work, and also the one that we get the most questions and feedback back and forth about. So take this information. I highly recommend, if you have a work that you want to apply for Showcase or get it on the website, do it now. Just start your work, draft it, and that way when applications do roll around, you've got a work ready and you're not, pushing to get that ready within that application window. But again, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you all have a wonderful evening, and hopefully we'll catch you on the next one. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you.